it is going, and there comes the light bulb, clickety click, like a typewriter's gears, click click click. One of these days we'll get sound. Peter, little visuals. Open the show of our evolution hour and troubles in paradise. The methodology of creationism, projectin.wordpress.com. Once again, if you don't have this on your little speed access link, why not? Because that's where I'm doing my work. Okay, we actually started just about on time here, and we got a few guests. Cap and Jackson will be kibitzing as need be as the time goes on. As those of you who are aware, the primary subject matter of the television here is the contested bones from creationist Christopher Rupe and John Sanford of genetic entropy fame. And I've been going through source by source by source, compiling his primary source base, Rupe's mainly, he's the point man on the show, on that particular book, where they're trying to dispute human evolution. And we went through the Neanderthals and the Homo floresiensis chapters, and now we're finally into Lucy in the YEC sky without diamonds episode, where they're finally getting into the australopithecines. And I put a couple sources up. There were actually quite a few more that I had acquired, but I wasn't able to find full text links available, so I didn't put them up in the linkages. All the stuff I try to put up in the show are to the full text so that everybody can follow up on their own. But the upshot is that Rupe is still trying to make the argument that australopithecines are just like chimpanzees. They got the body proportions and the structure of just chimpanzees, and they're not at all like what we're expecting from any transitional form. And the problem is that the sources that Rupe cites don't say that. That yes, there are some ape-like proportions on some of the bones, but not on others. They are just in every respect something that's changing from the standard arboreal mode, and nobody in the field was arguing that they weren't bipedal. They could also do other things like tree climbing and certain amount of arm swinging and the like, but nonetheless, they are essentially bipedal. So there were a few of the older and some newer papers. There's a 2009 paper on there that they were linking to. And I recommend you all take a look at those because they're really fascinating stuff. And even the older Johanson material from Nature are all very meticulous and careful. There's just starting to find the skeleton of Lucy at the time that's eventually going to be given that name more popularly. And the some of the bones were found and others are not. Some of the ones are from other specimens that they found. And another issue that Rupe and Sanford make a big deal of is whether there are more than one species involved. Or in other words, are they all just the Lucy species or cousins or others? And there again, they played fast and loose, trying to imply that there might not be some there were some fossils that are found that are probably not the same species, and they might even be within our genus of Homo. And this is not surprising because of Homo habilis being regarded as, is it the first Homo? Is it the first, the last of the most advanced Australopithecines? You know, it all depends on how you want to hair split. Yeah, jump in, Cap.
I have a question. You're saying it's the first Homo. Where was the first hetero then?
Yeah, they're indeed. That's why they all died out, because there were all these gay Australopithecines that couldn't quite get by. You terrible lad. You go for the cheap joke all the time. Yeah.
Hey.
It's inevitable. It's inevitable when damn Linnaeus decided to classify it under that terminology, and then the term carries on the same way as the planet Uranus and all of these things.
Yeah.
You know, snarky little jokes. We can't avoid it. But the thing is a legitimate taxonomical issue, because the actual paper, that 170s paper that I put up from Johanson, one of the issues that is, if you see variations in, say, pelvic size, are you looking at males versus females? Or are you looking at sexual dimorphism between male and female? Or are you looking at two separate species that just are very closely allied? Unless you have more examples, it's hard to do that, based upon just the fragmentary fossils at the time. So there was certainly a legitimate issue involved, but there's also a lot of meticulous taxonomy where they're going into the very gray details of the particular flanges and things that are occurring on bones that are distinctive of particular groups. They're distinctive of particular sexual things, because men and women in human beings and in primates often have very distinctive things. They go on, and they're very, very detailed in it. And you'll find that out when you read those papers, and you'll find out how little of that manages to filter through Rupe's argument. Oh, hi, BJ is here as well, and Brian. Brian Stevens says he has a very basic understanding of evolution, but even he already knows the term transitional fossil is a misnomer, since evolution is an ongoing process. All living and dead are transitional. That's quite true. Every single living organism has an unbroken lineage, according to evolutionary view, right back to the first life.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about, are we related to like turkeys? Yeah. And turkeys are related to wildebeests, and wildebeests are related to us, and we're all related to fungi, and fungi are all related to bacteria.
Yeah.
Everybody is a cousin of everybody else. The question is, what's the last common ancestor? So what they really mean, even in an evolutionary context, is how closely are we related? So we are more closely related to Shamu the killer whale than we are to the cricket on the hearth, because the last common ancestor of the one is much more closely related to us in time than farther back in time. But everything is related to everything else. To use a creationist term, all life is one gigantic baraman. And it's just a matter of figuring out where the branches are. And the branches have, modern systematics pays attention to a hell of a lot. The physical shape of the organism, the bones, the muscle attachments, and now, of course, the genes, the developmental processes of those genes, what genes are used as regulators, what mutations are there, what introns, which are the insertion points that don't get coded for inside of genes, the retrotransposons, all of that stuff. It's a vast array of data that's used as a way of working out the systematics, as Jackson well knows from bumping into a lot of the systematic literature. If you'd want to make a comment or two on that, Jackson.
There is, in fact, systematic literature.
Yeah.
I
I do have one question though for you too. I mean, if transitional fossils exist, where's the half wing, half arm?
Well, Cap, it's funny you say that, because Nathaniel Jensen says there are transitional fossils, even though
the creationists accept them.
Yeah, not only they accept them, that creationism predicts transitional fossils.
Somehow they avoided making that prediction any time up until Jensen claimed they did. But that's a little minor. But it is a legitimate conceptual.
See, that's for all the other lower life animals. Where's the transitional fossils for humans?
Yeah, well, we were just discussing one, australopithecines.
That's a chimpanzee. That's a chimpanzee.
Yeah, the big issue that was more of a big issue back when I was researching the field back in the 70s and 80s and getting into the creationism end from that end, because I'm an old fart, but is now kind of a dead letter because we've got the fossils settled, is which came first, upright bipedality or big brain? And the cliche view that led to the Piltdown hoax had to do with the idea, well, of course, the brain had to come first. So that the people who thought very superficially on there figured out that you'd have these brutish ape animals, but yet with an enlarging brain, and that was the dynamic feature involved. And that was the working hypothesis that led to the Piltdown hoax, where they were operating off of that presumption. But it turned out it was the other way around, that they found out from these australopithecines that started turning up in the 1920s on, and then they really started finding them with a vengeance in the 60s and 70s on. And have continued to find more and more and more branches on the trees before you even get to the australopithecines. Bipedality was a fairly common adaptation in these hominid lineages. They still walked around. Sometimes they were being bipedal up on the tree limbs. And they were perfectly capable of climbing trees, and they still had many ape-like characteristics. But nonetheless, the upright stance of being able to walk for long distances comfortably upright in a way chimpanzees don't do, or gorillas don't do, except for just short sprints, that is a very specific hominid thing that comes along before the brain starts getting all that much bigger. And so the idea that bipedality is opening up windows of adaptive possibilities that eventually leads to the things that adaptively support that bigger brain, that's a fascinating process that goes on. For one thing, if you become a biped and are good at walking around, you can carry baby in your arms. And that means the baby can mature more slowly because you're carrying it around in a way that you don't unless you happen to have like possums clinging to you.
You can also
as
carry
a
fruit to a
yeah.
mate.
Yeah.
That was Lovejoy's hypothesis, wasn't it? The mate
Yeah,
thing.
and the idea that there's just one explanation. No, it's probably a whole suite of
Right.
behavioral things clumping up together that have a big effect. This nothing buttery syndrome that occurs in a lot of superficial thinking, that it's got to be this or that, or it can't be either one of those, it's got to be this. The idea that all three of those things could happen simultaneously is a thing that causes some people's brains to seize up, but I'm going like, duh.
Yeah, I was reading the chat. What Peter was talking about the apparently
The promised Hovin debate.
Yeah, it's RJ. Are you do you need to go see a psychiatrist? I'm just wondering.
Oh no, I am looking forward to it. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, it was
I am not presuming that just because Hovind has said this, we're talking about Kent Hovind, the Donald Trump of creationism, that somebody who has made, Peter wants them to be conversations rather than formal debates, because Kent has a Gish Gallop mode in his debate structure that can obfuscate on an awful lot. So he's aiming at conversations. But I've been looking forward to talking with Hovind for quite some time, and I think there are not a few people in my audience who have been looking forward to me having a chat with.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering. I just gotta wait. I can't wait to find out when the funeral services are to be held for Hovind after tangling with you.
Well, not from his point of view.
Yeah.
But there were a ton of questions in the same way that I'm looking forward, hopefully, to being the little fly in the wall in the room when Matt Powell has his chat again with Jackson, because I have some methods questions I really want to ask that kid. He's a Hovind.
And then the whole talking as fast as when they were talking about legal dawn, this is what made me chuckle, was the talking as fast as Hovind. I don't see a real problem there when saying, with you talking fast. I'm like, yeah, you can get a lot of information in a very small time.
Slow and slovenly and sloth-like in my ability to talk. Yeah. Brian points out about the advantages of bipedality, that you can also see down into tall grass better. You're able to catch scent on the wind higher up bipedal. There's an awful lot of things, especially if you're a hunter. And so another big issue that certainly plays out in the discussion of the evolution of humans, and we'll find out in the due course whether or not Rupe and company bother to think about it much, is the eating of meat, and eventually the cooking of meat, and how early fire usage occurred in hominids. This, of course, is well after we're really more into the Homo erectus period on that front. And then, of course, the tool-making issue. There's been several papers that I put up in the linkages that did show stuff about the tools that are associated with a lot of these hominids, and you can trace them. If you look at them in the order that they're appearing chronologically, you can see they start out very rudimentary and they become more sophisticated over time. And people who replicate the tools are able to, in effect, get into the mind of the tool maker. Gonna go, hi, Peter, you have joined us. You were able to make it after all. It's probably considerably later over there in Europe land.
I was just going to watch, but I had to jump in because earlier I had a phone call with Kent Hovind, and that phone call had to be cut short for a reason, and I did want to share the reason with you. Because he was putting up a wall, so he couldn't talk that long, and I thought, considering the topic that we were discussing, and he had to leave because he was putting up a wall, I thought that was just too hilarious not to mention.
Kent's mental walls are sturdier than anything Donald Trump is attempting to build along the southern border.
Yeah.
But so just to inform you as well, because I did it in a tweet, but he has agreed to doing several talks. We'll start off with one, and I have decided that we will start off with the talk between Kent Hovind and James Downard. So I'm
Do we
going
have a
to.
tentative date for this interaction?
I'm trying to get a hold of his secretary, Rhonda, who isn't there at the moment, and I wanted to do it by phone.
She's
So I
been
at least,
raptured.
yeah, who knows? Maybe she's behind the wall now.
Yes.
I don't know. But no, I'm conceding the first one. The first one will be you, because I know that you have waited for this to happen for a very long time. I think I might even, if we get to a second one, get Tony Reed to do the second one, because I just want to see those two happen. I need
I want
to
to
see
see the bar
those two
really
happen.
high.
I need to see those two happen, and if then he's still alive enough to take me on, because I told him he could pick a topic to.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to him about who the hell thought to use Harun Yahya to do the PowerPoint that he was reading off of, and did he not bother reading it first before he was reading it cold on his video? I mean, this is a painfully obvious scholarly goof on his part, and I want to track down what's going on, and this will reveal clues about his resource base and his research team, in air quotes, that I think would be informative to know.
Yeah.
RJ.
Okay, and I just caught that Jackson will be talking to Matt Powell again.
Yeah,
Is that
correct? I understand so.
He allegedly he's emailed me and said at some time in the near to distant future we will be maybe talking.
And I want to be
however,
in the chat room, not in the side chat, but in the actual thing where I can be on hand, because there's a bunch of questions I want to ask him too.
I do actually have solid information. I will be talking to Mike Riddle. I finally got him. He called me yesterday, and so he is interested in doing a talk.
Okay, and Matt Powell yesterday agreed to talk to me as well. So
that's awesome.
Good times all along.
Indeed.
DJ says that every time the cat hears RJ, she wants attention. Well, I've got the cat audience nailed.
Yeah.
You should have a declawed.
Oh, those claws can come in handy. The little cat I used to have, Dusty, she had claws, and she was a cute little critter. That's many, many moons ago. Okay, so there we'll resume. Let's see, we're at 5:18. We'll resume our discussion of the australopithecine. So the major point that I want to make about that, it really goes down to the whole notion on that transitional form issue that Brian was bringing up, is that how do you tell from just a fossil or a single bit or a group of fossils whether something is a distinct species or natural variation within a species or sexual dimorphism, difference between male and female within a single species? Well, you've got to accumulate more data on it. And it's perfectly feasible that you can make a legitimate dispute on any of these things. But one thing that's going to remain the same is the reason why there would be a dispute is because natural species vary a lot. And individuals can vary within a species, and that closely allied species are going to look more closely allied than something much farther away, which is why if you find a fossil bone of a pelvis thing, you can say, well, this is almost australopithecine-ish, but it sure as hell ain't chimpanzee. And so you're able to differentiate between things that are much farther away on the scale than, and no one in their right mind would say, well, this is clearly from a cow. No. Once in a while, you can find certain individual bones that if you were just looking at a fragment or a thing, you might make a mistake. That was the thing with the Nebraska man, where molars in mammals tend to look very similar, and pig molars at times can look very similar to a human molar if you view them in isolation. If you had a jaw attached to it, it would stand out like a sore thumb that it was not quite the same. So always it's a matter of more data. So whenever anybody tries to pull the wool over your eyes, look to see when the source was made, look to see the older it is, why haven't they done a follow-up, why aren't they offering new material, what's the current position on those data, get a look at what the data is. So instead of just taking the creationist word for it when they say, oh, these things are chimpanzee-like, look at them and find out what qualifies as chimpanzee-like and read what the source actually says. And when the source doesn't mention, they don't say that Lucy looks like a chimpanzee. No, that's Rupe's spin on the subject matter. Oh, BJ says that deer feet bones look like human hands. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things. For one thing, we're all made of tetrapodal, pentadactyl limbs to start with. As mammals are pretty boring in that respect. They don't drop digits in quite the same relentless way the dinosaurs did. That's one of the reasons why bird wings end up looking the way they do. And so the transitional fossil intermediate, the other issue is how close do you need to be a legitimate transitional fossil? Do you need to be right literally on this is your literal grandparent? Or can they be a close cousin that may have some variations to it, but they have the overall features needed for that transition? And that's where the ability to predict things comes in, the ability to anticipate where the fossil direction is going. The team that's doing better will find that they're able to anticipate where the fossils are going better than the team that's got the wrong model. And in that respect, creationists haven't even got on the field. They've never been able to anticipate a damn thing. Silence from the peanut gallery.
I agree.
Yeah. It's how can deer feet bones look like, human hands? We all know that they're different kinds. I mean, they can't interbreed anymore.
Well, so RJ, they don't mention Todd Wood at all, do they?
No, and that's what's fascinating is I did a quick scan through Rupe to find out whether or not they draw upon much in the way of creationism. They've got a few teeny little stuff, catch pools, some of his stuff gets alluded to, but I did note that when they were talking about Sediba later on, and I just did a quick dash forward because you know about that example, Australopithecus Sediba, no mention whatsoever of any of the creationist baraminology work. Now, this doesn't mean Rupe doesn't know anything about it. He may very well know about it, but he isn't putting that on his side. And that's an ironic bit, because if you're proud of your work, if you contend the creationist community is doing really solid scientific work, why wouldn't you want to cite them? You'd be proud to cite them. You'd be Johnny on the spot to do so.
To be fair, I made note of one creationist who disagrees even with the method used to categorize organisms together, which is a normal, standard scientific method, but they're just trying to truncate it and call it a kind. I mean, heck, creationists can't even agree on the methodology of the very research they're doing.
Yeah,
so how in the heck are they supposed to make conclusions?
You have 3 games in town, and it's fun to see how they play around with them. One, you've got your standard Linnaean taxonomy system, which is a genera with a species identification. So we are Homo sapiens, we're in the Homo genus, and then sapiens, the thinking man, is in the species. And so Tyrannosaurus rex, that's the rex species of the Tyrannosaurus genera. A lot of creationists and in fact, grassroots evolutionists may not realize when they're talking about T-Rex, yes, you're talking about a species, but it's in a genera Tyrannosaurus. So it's a nested hierarchy. Now, creationists have a bunch of bottlenecks to go through, which I've mentioned before, and I'll just reprise again just in case they haven't heard it. And to the surprise of some who haven't really realized this, there are 2 bottlenecks, not one. The obvious one is the flood bottleneck, where all the animals that exist now had to be descended from the kinds that were aboard the ark. But they forget the first bottleneck is that all the animals preserved in the fossil record that died in the flood have to be descended from the original created kinds that have to be the same as the ones that were on the ark, because that's the whole point of preserving the created kinds. So there's the first bottleneck where all the diversity that we can see in the fossil record had to have originated just between 4000 BC and 2350 BC. So in the course of 1700 years, all that diversity had to originate. And then after the flood, for some weird reason, a completely different set of diversity occurs from the ones that make it through the ark, but half of them die off anyway, because even by their own definition. So they actually have a mess to work with. So how are they going to systematize these kinds? Well, they could use the generic system that the Linnaeans do, but then you're talking about species, and there is nowhere near enough space on the ark for species. They gave that one up a long time ago. So they have to have kinds being way bigger than a species group, and the traditional kind is a family, which is way above even genera. So you're including a hell of a lot of stuff in that, and they're okay with that pretty much, except for us.
Yeah, I was about ready to say, but you're forgetting when you start using their own definition, therefore you have to include humans in there. And where did they come from? Oh,
Is in the same family group as all the other higher primates and all the australopithecines. And so if they're just going to use that standard, Lucy the australopithecine is in the human baraman. Now that's not going to fly. So they have to now use a second standard. And now they are fissioned to where, why use one standard in one context and another standard in another? And of course, the new technique is you come up with a new analysis mode that doesn't have to pick species. It can look at whatever taxonomical group you want. And so in principle, I can't remember what they call it, a NOPA or something like that. But anyway, they have an acronym for it, which is the technique that the baraminologists used. And Jackson has seen the outcome of this. They have these little charts where they've got a bunch of little black boxes and stuff. What they're attempting to do, they're taking the anatomical characteristics, which, by the way, they didn't come up with. They picked them up parasitically from the cladistic analyses that's done by the regular paleontologists. And they feed all of that data into a kind of a matrix to get a dimensional image of all of that stuff. And the theory being that if you plot it out in dimension, you're going to see a big blob representing a kind and other blob over here representing a kind, and there won't be any gap, any linkages between them. There won't be any overlap. They'll be very distinctive, and those will be the baramans. And the fossil representative of those will be the holobaramans. Now, within a baraman, then you can have evolutionary lineages, and they call those monobaramans. And that is where things get fun, because they find monobaramans being the entire horse sequence. And then, as Todd Wood showed in his analysis, he ended up lumping one of the australopithecines, Sediba, in with the human baraman, because they'd had enough characteristics that were overlappy that by their own rule put him in our side. Well, and needless to say, the creationists didn't like that at all.
Oh yeah, I actually, that was part of the subject of my video, the source methods approach, where I talked about that. I also found an article yesterday quoting I don't remember, one of the creationists talking about how actually the ancestors of modern marine whales, the terrestrial ones, might have been on the ark and then became marine afterwards.
Whoa! Oh, I gotta see that one. You gotta send me that one. Holy moly! That's hyperspeciation on steroids. I think the intelligent design advocates are going to have apoplexy over that one.
It's Kurt Wise who said it. He says,
Kurt should have known better on that one. I gotta have the source on that, because that's cranial blockage of the rectum dumb for a paleontologist, and he has a paleontology degree. If he's trying to argue that all of the cetacean diversity occurs post-flood, whoa, that's a gigantic concession.
Whoa.
So, quote, vestigial legs and hips in modern whales confirm legged ancestors of the whales existed only a short time ago. It is possible that the purely marine cetaceans of the present were derived from semi-aquatic or even terrestrial ancestors on the ark.
Whee! Is that on what is that from a particular creationist journal or a web posting or what?
I think it's the link that he just shared in the
quoted
Oh, you got
from
the,
Issues in Creation. But yes, I got the link right here on the side.
Yeah,
for you.
I gotta have that. That's sweet.
I'm just trying to. Okay, my brain is trying to wrap
To
around
wrap
that,
himself around
and
that because
it's like
intelligent designers
how?
won't acknowledge. If you look over at the I'm trying to remember the damn guy that's the whale anti-whale evolution a point man. He's done a bunch of videos on it. I can't think of his name right off the bat. No, Sternberg. There we go. Richard Sternberg. And he's done a bunch of videos. He has not done a paper yet at Biocomplexity, which is their in-house journal. And I've been just itching to see that one pop up down the line, because then I could check up on his sources. He argues that, oh, there's not nearly enough time in millions and millions and millions of years to get the whales evolved from any land animal. And meanwhile, Kurt Wise over in Creation Science Land is having them all diversify since 2350 BC.
Which that actually no, I guess according to the biblical chronology that happened before. I was gonna say, wouldn't that put a damper on the Jonah story? But
Well,
I like, no, the flood happened and then the Jonah. The Bible timeline is so convoluted; it's hard to keep it straight.
Yeah. You see, I actually said in my video whale sex, why don't they just say it's the pachycetid kind or the ambulocetid kind?
Well, there he did. Jack Wise was listening to you without you realizing it.
Maybe. I said it way back then, so.
Wow, yeah, because the thing is that there's an awful lot of grasping at straws, and I find it's sad in the case of Wise, because he, after all, has a paleontology degree, a real live one. He studied under Stephen Jay Gould. He's always been a young Earth creationist, and he's always been digging his heels in on that point. But when I would read his arguments, given that he's a professional paleontologist, I was always amazed at how relatively superficial his writing was. I mean, I seem to know as much about paleontology as he does. What's wrong with this picture? You know, when you interact with a real professional paleontologist on their own turf, they can't avoid being detailed. And so Wise is pretty slim on that one. So for him to make that kind of an assertion is just, you know, my mammalian jaw has to drop on that one.
Yeah, it's pretty great. But that's
we're about halfway through the show. Let me put up another put up my Patreon listing here and my shameless plug, which I like to do right in the middle of the show so I can bore everybody, because it never does any good. And let me put that over there.
I have to laugh at one though that I got on our creationists I got into a debate with. I got them to admit that a kind is both a genus and a family.
Ooh, that's like broad. Anyway, let me.
I'll tell you
tip patrons.
Yeah.
We've got Stephen and Dyer and Eat and Yui and Mona and Hendril and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles and Alex and brand new Surus, who I just had a nice chat with on his channel yesterday, and Totis Real and Everett Vincent and Paul Williams. Thank you all. And there is my website. Behold and partake of #tip at tortuganwordpress.com. It won't do a damn bit of good if you're not reading it and sharing it and putting up questions and doing anything else that's going on. You can pick my brain. I leave the Patreon site up, although I have to warn, they are slow as molasses on actually dispersing money when I'm at that low level. So I put in bigger type, please donate at GoFundMe.com. That's the way to help the old RJ. You can do a recurring thing through them just as easily, and it actually gets to me quickly. So there's my pathetic can rattle for my project, because I am, after all, only a Social Security person with a little bit of book revenue, and which you can find links at the website and that as well. And so hopefully we're back onto regular screen there, and we've got past that. The next half of the show. Oh yeah, jump in, Peter.
Since you mentioned tapping your brain, I got an idea recently, which would need me to tap your brain an awful lot, because I'm thinking of putting up a web page with significant transitional fossils, and then having all the significant creationists statement on what that fossil actually is. So when it comes to like
Ooh, wow.
the
In many
Australopithecus.
ways, it's a smaller field on the creationist response end, because often they're not discussing a lot of details.
No, but they will they will classify things different. So when it comes to the Australopithecus afarensis, one will say it's human, the other will say it's an ape. So
that's already
why,
been done, by the way. There have been several critics of creationism that have cataloged, I think, stuff that was done at the NCSE and others over the years. I'll have to look around and hunt for it so we can deal with the links. But actually, they went through and cataloged how different creationists would classify Neanderthals and Homo erectus and all of that, and they get into an absolute mess on it. It's complete confusion. I don't know whether Center might have been one of those that did that, but there's been various ones over the years. So somebody's beat us to the punch on that, and what we would then do is just link to their work on that.
Well, that would be good as well. But is it still available online?
Oh, because yeah. Oh yeah, all of that stuff. That stuff we functionally be acting. Here's the thing that I've been trying to hammer into everybody's head, that there's been an awful lot of work already done, and the problem is that too many of us try to reinvent the wheel when somebody's already done it, and we just don't know it. And so it's a matter of tracking down where that's been done and acting as an interconnected base, because just like Jackson didn't realize that I'd already done work on that Proto-Avis reference in the Nature, and so whoop, I can speed up the thing on it. On the reptile-mammal transition, we know very few of the anti-evolutionists even bump into it, let alone try to discuss this. Literally, Duane Gish and Krieger are the only ones that ever mentioned probanognaathids, one of the spectacular predicted transitionals in the reptile-mammal transition. So it's a short list. You get you get way more on Archaeopteryx, and those basically classify into two groups. The majority of creationists and anti-evolutionists say that it's just a bird, just a perfectly normal bird with teeth and a tail, and that's perfectly normal. And then a tiny minority, I think really it was only pandas and people, and I don't know whether or not Dembski-Wells jumped off that gangplank when they revamped the book for Design of Life, insisted it's actually just a reptile that just superficially resembles a bird. It's not really a bird at all. And so they were taking the oddball thing. The fact that it has feathers seemed to be not a problem for them. And so really, although there are lots of transitional fossils, the very thing is about how creationists don't really classify them. They don't really deal with them. And the only ones who sort of kind of try are the baraminologists, and they've been really, really slow on the uptake. They avoid most of these systematic areas. So basically, it's human evolution and Archaeopteryx, and a snippet on the whales where they're basically trying to disconnect everything. You know, there's been Sarfati and a few people on that. So it's actually less than you might think, Peter.
Okay. Yeah. I'd still be curious, because yeah, if it has been done, I'd like to have the link to a page where
yeah, I'll have to put a little thing on there where I'll have to probably Google around on it. But I've seen charts of where critics of creationism have literally gone through and cataloged the various versions of how creationists deal with the particular human fossils, because the humans, they all go in on, because all anti-evolutionists don't like the idea of human evolution. It doesn't matter whether they're young earth creationist or not. They cannot allow, humans must be special. We must have been created intentionally at some point fairly recently. So even old earth creationists like you, Ross, kind of hover in that mode. And the funny thing about intelligent designers are that they don't do systematics at all, period. That they literally don't attempt to defend kinds. They don't attempt to defend stuff. They just hair split like Duane Gish, but minus the baraminology. And it's a fascinating phenomenon to go into, which is I'll eventually be going into. I suppose in a way I'll be tracking that same field when I do the speciation book, which if I live long enough to do, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, please support so I can stay alive.
Yeah. But yeah, I was going to say that the one that I was going to tell about the creationists who I got into it, and I asked them this knowing how they would answer, because I knew it was kind of a trick question. Yeah, it was probably not nice on my part, but I asked them, I said, okay, so what's a kind? They go, well, you know what a kind is. I said, all right, let me ask you this. Is a kind like an equus, such as a horse, which that would obviously be the genus category. I said, or is it more of a canidae? Yeah, the family that dogs are a part. And they went, oh yeah, it's like both. They go, that's exactly what I go. You do realize you just mix, family and genus together. They go, oh well, it's like, a wolf would be a dog kind, would be the dog kind. I go, so now it's at the species level of Canis lupus, and it's like no, that's exactly what you. It was
yeah, it's a sliding scale. Overall, Pheromonology treats kinds as families, which is the traditional definition of kinds. So they're not being innovative here. Those are the traditional elements. The problem is there's so much bloody data going on, and deal with most of the fossil record. Jumping James.
I have mentioned in my video New Kinds how some say that a kind is the reproductive boundary of population, which is approximately species. John Woodmarap says it's a genus. Ken Ham said it was simultaneously a family and an order. And then Georgia Purdom said it was a class and a superorder at the same time. In an interview, which I have on my channel, her saying there's a dinosaur kind and a bird kind. So it can be literally anything.
Yeah, and Purdom shows she doesn't even read AIG, because Leitner at AIG in their technical journal laid out the criteria where they worked out, I think, 180 some odd kinds, and it's clearly the number that was being used for the bird kind list on the ARC encounter. So the problem is Answers in Genesis' Georgia Purdom does not pay attention to Answers in Genesis' ARC encounter or Answers in Genesis' Susan Leitner. I mean, this is not exactly a pile up.
There could be two reasons for that, James. There could be two reasons for that. One is that half of the time she has to be home because she's homeschooling her own kids, but it could also be for people who frequently watch Answers News, which we all have Paul from Paulogia to thank for, because he got us into getting hooked on 2 times a week up to an hour of nonsense. But if you watch that regularly, you'll see that Ken Ham is constantly putting down Georgia Purdom, so maybe she just wants to strike back and just disagree with him in public.
It's because Ken Ham
piss him off.
Yeah. I'll never understand.
Some side comments in there. Brian brought up Jack Horner's work lately, which actually brings us right back to the other half of the show that I was wanting to get to, which is the soft tissue issue. And BJ asks, is Jack Horner the cowboy hat guy? He does occasionally. Yeah, he's the one that's the model of the archaeologist or the paleontologist in the Jurassic Park stories. And not to be confused with Robert Backer, who also wears a cowboy hat. So, but he has the ponytail. Anyway, Jack Horner is a major dinosaur paleontologist, also known as John, because that's his regular name, but he's commonly referred to as Jack. He is connecting up with the group with Mary Schweitzer, who's doing the soft tissue material. So that brings us to the second topic that I wanted to bring up, which is the Mark Armitage case. Mark Armitage is a young Earth creationist, and it was prodded because C. Brown, the creationist who has been haunting this series of lectures that I've been giving on the Rupe Sanford book, a couple of weeks ago, lobbed at me a video from Mark Armitage from, I think, 2013, 2014. I put the link up to it, where he is defending his position on the soft tissue and that how these osteocytes in the blood were being preserved, and this couldn't possibly have occurred except if the earth were young and that the tissue was still pliable after he dissolved it away and looked at the components of it. And he's very impressed, and C. Brown obviously was very impressed with this. So I was doing a little bit more on the Armitage case, and one thing that points out too was the idea that Armitage was wrongfully dismissed in his lawsuit over being wrongfully dismissed. Well, no, he didn't win the lawsuit, he had gotten a settlement where the college decided not to make a big deal out of it, and so they paid a settlement to him. And the issue clearly was how good of a scientist was he, and how much of an annoyance was he as somebody who was actually a young Earth creationist, and they were tired of having him around. It would have been a fun thing to have seen him get to the final court
that
case.
Guy. Oh God.
I think.
Sorry.
Oh no,
Jump Jackson.
I was just saying. I think part of it was there was a colleague who allegedly made some comment to him, and that was part of it. Part of why they went with the settlement. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of acrimony. If he was anywhere near as annoying as David Kopej was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I would think they'd be glad to get rid of him. But the thing is, I put up a bunch of linkages to some of the coverage on the flap part of it, because it intrigues me, as usual. The little gang at the Discovery Institute that riffs off of this material only highlights that it is an anti-evolutionist who is being persecuted for his religious faith. They never really highlight the fact that he's a young Earth creationist. And therefore, you might argue that maybe he has a lot of doctrinal baggage that alters how rigorous he is in the scientific realm. Anyway, I also got fascinated by the whole soft tissue osteocyte thing. And I couldn't really find any technical literature that bore directly on his claim that you kind of like a pliability to the material if you started dissolving it properly, which is what he did. It seems like that's not necessarily an unusual phenomenon, independent of how old it is. But the other was the osteocytes, and I started researching that, and I found quite a lot. Mary Schweitzer had done quite a lot on this, and it's not just dinosaurs. They have found a lot of fossil tissue forms of this type, including osteocytes, and they did a lot on turtles, fossil turtles.
Yes.
And that brings up the issue of how do you preserve an osteocyte? And they're little itty bitty tiny little things that if you look at them, they look like somebody's cartoon version of a nanobot with little legs that come out, but it's just the little tendrils that come off of the thing. They're kind of like little lozenge-shaped giddies. And that's when I stumbled upon this one little paper that Schweitzer cited in her own work, that osteocytes can mineralize on their own in living organisms. They can mineralize after death, post-mortem, very quickly. And so the idea is that it isn't helping the creationist case to show how easily these things can mineralize, because they can do that 80 million years ago just as easily as 8 years ago. And once they become mineralized, what prevents them from staying there indefinitely? The most beautiful example of why things don't deteriorate over time is insects and lizards even trapped in amber. Once they're sealed off, nothing causes them to decay. They stay there indefinitely.
Yeah,
and the idea that tiny microscopic bits of tissue trapped inside of bone, Armitage argues that the Triceratops horn is so porous that the bacteria would have creeped in and prevented it from being preserved. But that wouldn't apply, it wouldn't bear upon osteocyte preservation, because that could occur immediately in an existing environment. It doesn't even need to be under particularly unusual paleontological circumstances. So I was already spotting material that suggested that Mark Armitage might have been living out some relevant data. Oh, shock to hear that.
Yeah. Who would have thought that? Yeah, the Armitage guy, when you said it was the Triceratops horn guy, and I'm like, oh God, not him. I had a long debate with a friend of mine on Facebook where I was posting all of Mary Schweitzer's work because it pertained to the same thing. Yeah. And I'm like, no, here's what it is. Here's why that we know this happens. The guy was flat out wrong and lying. And
well, not lying. He's operating within that Tortugan frame. For him, all it takes is for him to see these preserved cells, and bingo, it's young. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The problem is he won't analyze anything beyond that. What was intriguing about the C. Brown creationist is that when he was lobbing this at me, it was over the issue of whether or not the samples were microscopic. And it's painfully obvious, including Armitage's work, that they are microscopic. He's literally describing the microscope he's using that he has to magnify to see them. That, of course, they're microscopic. But C. Brown was treating them as not microscopic, and he was offering this video as verification that they were not microscopic samples when even the video didn't dispute that they were microscopic samples. And I'm going, it was most intriguing, to say the least.
Yeah.
But if you have the mindset of a C. Brown, except it's Mark Armitage, no information can persuade this guy that he's not looking at something that's young. He's only going to be data selecting information that reinforces that it's young. Nothing can ever disprove that to him. And that's not a good scientific attitude. You have to try to test out your hypothesis and pay attention to all the data field. And in that respect, there's every reason to wonder why this guy would be employed in an area where he was essentially a technician, lab technician type. Same thing that you found with the technical work that was being done by David Capege over at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And eventually they outstay their welcome, and then you get a little lawsuit thing going on in here. But this will be continuing to go because it continuously gets referred to by creationists, even though the video that the guy put out is now 5 years old. So water has gone under the bridge since then. And yet they're still treating it as a secondary authority quote source that they're never going to fact check. They're never going to allow not to be true, and you'll have to deal with it. And you get used to it. So everybody from Suris's show from yesterday that may be tuning in, they'll be able to see some more of the relevant information and link to the links on that, because it came up in the course of the discussion there with one of the questions, readers' questions, and I said, oh, I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow. So tomorrow is now today, and we have done that.
Yeah, I just never. I like I said, I guess probably when I said it, lying probably wasn't the best term, but to me, because the information
I avoid that term like the plague. The only time that I will call somebody being flat out lying is if you can literally catch them in a direct one. So, for example, there was a person just on Twitter today that I said, no, you're on this. They're saying, oh, there are no transitional forms. And I had repeatedly called attention specifically to the reptile-mammal transition, which she never responded on. So the idea that what she should have said is, I refuse to accept the transitional forms that are presented to me. That's not the same thing as saying there are no transitional forms. It just is there's none you want to accept. That's a very different thing. To repeat that initial statement, or the same way this other Twitter nincompoop, Tertius, that I deal with, he constantly blusters, and it's no coincidence that he's a Donald Trump supporter. He thinks exactly like him, where he keeps on insisting he's refuted me on all these points. Oh, I've debunked that. No, he hasn't. He's never offered a damn source. He's never responded on any of the material. It's painfully obvious. When he says that over and over and over again, that elevates to the level of flat out lie. This is a little different than Kent Hovind repeating the same tropes over and over again. But that's another reason why I'm looking forward to being the fly on the wall with Matt and Jackson, because of the fact that you've got Jackson or Matt relying on Kent Hovind as a secondary source and other quote mines as secondary sources that he's never bothered to fact check. And you have to poke into their head to try to find out why they can think to do that. The expanding sun argument that Kent Hovind used, I want to know where he got that from, because this was an argument that Hovind was making back in the 1990s, back when Matt was a fetus, maybe. And supposedly, when I challenged Hovind on it at the time, he backed off from it and said, I don't use that in my current videos. So either Matt was watching an extremely old video and never dawned on him to fact check that, or Kent Hovind has decided to unstop using it and has repeated it in a more recent video, in which case I want to know about that, because I got him by the vice balls, because that is one of the stupidest arguments I've ever heard from Kent. It's patently false. It's idiotically wrong. And so if he's repeated it again, I want to have the reference on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess, like I said, probably saying lying was probably not the best choice of words on that.
Yeah, just say Tortugan. It's easier.
Yeah, It's I was just, to me, I viewed it as he was lying because he knows the data, he knows the work that's out there, and yet he's still being dishonest. And to me, that would be, you're telling a lie, in my opinion.
I use it very tactically. For one thing, it has a level of pejorative about it that immediately complicates the matter.
Yeah.
And you can still dispute the fact but I'm very reserved about using the word lying. For one thing, because I have the Tortucan conception of the way their minds work, and you can poke under the hood to see they're so sloppy in their credulity and their willingness to accept secondary sources, as I hope, Peter, I will get a chance to grill Hovind on regarding his use of Harun. Yeah. Listen to the cat. Listen to the cat. That I want to know how he managed to come by that, because this allows us to see that I would think that when Kent was repeating line by line by line this Harun Yahya posting, that he was seeing it for the first time, repeating it as if it were true, never thinking to vet it first, let alone reading the original Fiducia paper, which was available online. I put a linkage up to it in my Evolution Hour on it. It's not as though the information isn't available or the criticism of it isn't available. It's literally a mouse click away. And so this is the thing that really pisses me off about all the creationists that we've encountered. And Cap, you've experienced it. Jackson, you've experienced it. Peter, you've experienced it. I've experienced it. They're so damn effing lazy. It's 2018. If you want to look up the science information and dispute it and argue it, fine and dandy. But they're so lazy, they don't get to that level.
Well, what baffles me is that Yahya started out just rehashing Hovind's DVDs in his own way, and now Hovind is citing Yahya. We've come full circle.
It is weird. Well, Yahya is an intriguing case because he is, of course, a pure parasitical citer. This guy is not a primary source researcher. He scavenged, or rather, he has a staff of people who scavenge for him, and then it gets put under his name, which is a nom de plume. He's actually named Adnan Akhtar, I think. He's kind of a Trumpian sort of hedonistic egomaniac millionaire who has, he's an Islamic creationist. But he started out temporarily riffing off of, probably because he didn't know the field well. And then he fairly quickly decided, no, that's not a good idea. They're really stupid. So he then backed off and has basically tripped off of intelligent design apologetics. But for Hovind to have glommed onto it, of all the sources for him to trip over, it reveals something about the superficial secondary core. Somebody, not Hovind, because otherwise Hovind would have known the terms inside of it. If he had ever read this thing before, he was stumbling over the terminology. That somebody on his staff had found this, and it got presented to him like on a plate, where here's the piece, and then Hovind reads it cold for his audience. That also shows how lazy he is. That don't you? I do my work. I try to check out the source material. I put up a linkage to something that's a secondary where you can't read the whole material. I want you to be able to follow it up on your own. So I try to owe the audience to be that rigorous for even a low budget show, a no budget show like mine. But Hovind doesn't even get that far. He has no respect for his audience. All he is willing to do is pervade the glop. Nobody ever calls him to account. Matt Powell's of the world are never going to be fact-checking him. They're not going to be holding him to account in the same way that Donald Trump supporters don't hold him to account. So that's why this methods issue, this source methodology matters. It's how people think badly. The people who think badly and arrive at weird decisions do so to the thing. Oh, the Oxford the link that Brian put up there was to the Oxford English. So I have not done that, but I suppose I will have to do so. And then if people start using it more, if you make hashtag Tortucan alert trending, then people will have to pay notice of it. Every time you read or see a creationist somewhere on Twitter who says some cockamamie stupid thing where they're clearly ignoring data and they're not thinking about subjects, put Tortucan alert up there, because that's a description of them.
Okay.
Yes,
So
someone was.
you just mentioned Matt Powell. I was watching his live
Whoops!
stream yesterday.
Whoops! I think I've got something. I think I'm not blinded on my thing. Wait a minute. Let me see if I'm. Yep, I gotta mute myself on the other screen. There we go. Accidentally hit play on the thing and was getting back
Oh,
feed from the live feed. My mistake.
okay. Okay.
Anyway,
So
whoever was talking, please tell me.
yeah, I was in on Matt Powell's live stream yesterday where they were talking about evolution. So I thought that would be a good one to just jump in and see if I could get in the chat. Not only are they not fact checking, what I noticed is that every single atheist who made a comment in the side chat that would point to evidence against something they were claiming at the time got the comment removed or was blocked completely from the.
Now that is very revealing, because now you are objectively measuring their response system, which is to push away contrary information and not allow it to be visible. And of course, therefore, they never even need to get to it. Oh, BJ puts up a question way off topic. Do echidna have wings? Heard it on a SciShow that they have remnants of wings. You must have misheard. No echidna. Echidnas are the little monotremes.
That sounds
in
like
there, and there's none with wings at all. So you maybe have heard a term that sounded like an echidna. Or if it was on a science show, I think you need to rethink whether that was a science show.
RJ, you know what that sounds like? That sounds like Eugene McCarthy, because he said he follows through with the idea that like mammal groups are made from hybrids, and so he said that, that monotremes are the remnants
human pig hybrid
of a hybridization between birds and mammals. So
if you were bumping into Eugene McCarthy, who is had an actual science life, and then apparently his brain went through fart mode, and he is just a wackaloon now.
Wow.
Eugene McCarthy, not to be confused with the presidential candidate from the 1960s, different Eugene McCarthy.
Yeah, when I think of McCarthy, I think of two people come to mind: General McCarthy and
that would
the
be MacArthur.
Oh, McCarthy. I don't know why I thought it was McCarthy. Okay, never mind then.
Your mind
and
is
then the McCarthy commie trials, Red Scare.
Yeah, that would be yipes.
I can think of his first name.
Yeah, Joe McCarthy.
Yeah.
What about Melissa
Tail
McCarthy?
Gunner Joe. Yeah, he was just imploding when I was born in the early 1950s. So he's a tad before my time, let alone any of yours, other than maybe Peter in the same room. Anyway, so we're now past 6 o'clock on that one. I've touched on the various points involved on all the various links. They're all fascinating science works. Not everybody needs to follow up on everything that I put on links on, but if any of it catches your eyeball as saying, ooh, that sounds, check it out and read it and share it to everybody. And so ideally, to get back to the methodology issue about not reinventing the wheel, the whole point of this project and all the stuff that I do on social media is to try to connect people together in a way that's more efficient and more effective, so that we have to spend less time reading somebody else's work and more time doing new work, building on other people's work, so that we can speed up the process of responding to creationists and other wooists in any way. Because we've got a terrible anti-science thing going on in the current administration, in some state houses, and in other countries and places where this interacts with political regimes that want to interfere with science or culture and suppress a free independent press and demonize the press. This is not good, because information has to flow freely. Let the spice flow, to borrow something from Herbert. And the truth has to flow, and information needs to flow. And this is how you differentiate between woo and not woo, and see what actually is so, to build up your accurate worldview. And it's as annoying as little flat earthers can be, as an extreme case, they're trivial compared to the impact that the culture camp conservative creationist worldview has, that is people making decisions for people as we speak in the Trump administration, Betsy DeVos and Vice President Pence and Scott Pruitt at EPA and Rick Perry and Ben Carson. These people are anti-evolutionists, and they embody that secondary mindset, dogma first, information only when convenient mentality that gets a Tortugan alert, make that trending. And so you can use that hashtag Tortugan alert in any context like that, where you don't have to call somebody a liar, you don't have to call them stupid or a moron, you don't have to use an insult. Instead, you can be far more damaging and say Tortugan alert, that you've got somebody that just doesn't think about things they don't think about, stuff's bouncing off the mine shell. So if the more people can use that, the more people can use that. Okay, any final questions, comments?
Nope.
Why is the sky blue, RJ?
Why is the sky blue?
Because there's water above
God farted.
I know. I just learned this because a very good YouTuber, Tau City Alpha, just released a video that explains it. Above the dome is heavy water. That's why it's blue.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, because there we go. That's sciencey.
Yeah, and they can prove that water, that clouds are not water vapor, because if you stick a glass, like a clear glass thing, over a thing of water out in the heat, it will evaporate, but no clouds will form, and thus therefore is water above the firmament that makes the sky blue.
Well, that solidifies it for me.
There it is. That settles it. Next week, by the way, I'll be having Godfrey World on as a guest, because we had a nice little chat with him and discovered that he had actually attended a lecture, a debate that Dwayne Gish was involved in today. And those are not all that common to bump into today. So I'm going to be wanting to pick his brain as a guest on the show and reminisce about these things for my own better understanding of Dwayne Gish, who may be a little old or name on the anti-evolution front compared to Ken Ham and the others that are still knocking around, but he's still a very influential character in the anti-evolution movement, even though he's now been dead for about 10 years.
Well, I recently watched a video with Godfrey World. That should be a very interesting show. I will be very much looking forward to that.
He was happy with the discussion. We had a lot of neat, fun stuff going on in there, and I said, "Oh, I'd like to have you on my show." And the nearest he was available that I invited on, frankly, for today, but he was busy for the 4th. But the 11th turns out to be fine, so it'll be next Wednesday, and we'll have that in addition to the continuing saga of Rupe and Sanford continue to screw the pooch when it comes to their scholarship.
Yeah.
So
should be cool. And I have a question for Cap Brony, because I know you're a fan. Did you see Pete and Peter's last video? They proved there is no oxygen in water. I still have to go look at that.
Oh,
they have scientific proof there's no oxygen
I had
in water.
enough of them on movie night. That was enough on movie night. I don't need any more. No, just how.
If you wanted to see what a brain fart looks like, Pete and Peter is it on video.
Yeah, and I am officially ashamed of having the name Peter now.
It's for now, and there's no offense on that. There's none. There's none. Take creationist name James, and it's the little cross we must all bear. So anyway, let me close the show down.
I know,
here
no
Jackson. Past the hour.
Yeah,
and thank you all for showing up. I think Peter has a little to ask me after I conclude the broadcast, which we are doing now. Everybody check out my website. If you haven't gotten either one of my books, especially Slam Dunk, anything stopping you, please get it. I can use the royalties. And if you can help at the GoFundMe, I'm still looking for that crowd. We can definitely use the help. Thank you very much. And till next week.